Hello and welcome to the Communication Solution Podcast with Casey Jackson and John Gilbert. I'm your host, Danielle Cantin. Here at the Institute for Individual and Organizational Change, otherwise known as IFIOC, we love to talk about communication, we love to talk about solutions, and we love to talk about providing measurable results for individuals, organizations, and the communities they serve. Welcome to the communication solution that will change your world.
Hey, welcome everyone. This is Danielle Cantin. I am facilitating the Communication Solution Podcast with Casey Jackson and John Gilbert. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. I've got a fun topic for us to discuss. The holidays are upon us, and it seems like it starts earlier and earlier every year. And I'm just curious, as I'm starting to interact more and more with friends and family, and talking to other people and the stress that creeps up. So I thought that'd be a great topic to dive into, just stress in general around the holidays and where that little segue or interaction is, or how motivational interviewing could potentially help.
This is one of those ones, Danielle, that I think it'll be fun to differentiate healthy communication from motivational interviewing. Because fundamentally motivational, the constructs that I think would work well during stressful times or stressful family situations are things where, are you trying to reduce resistance or tension or discord? Absolutely. For some people during the holidays, that would be a gift under the tree, as if there's a little less stress or discord amongst family members or friends. So there's aspects of MI that we know that can do that, but it's not fundamentally, well, maybe it is about behavior change. But then there's more. I know John would love to dive into the ethics of trying to get your family members to change just because you want them to. And is that MI? But I think it is a fascinating topic to talk about. What I would even launch a little bit with is just my brain goes to brain science because I'm just so immersed in that right now, just trying to understand better and look at trauma. And the more pressure we feel, I think your point, especially about how early it starts now. I know in our house, it was the day after Halloween that Christmas trees started going up, which tends to draw a lot of ire from some people. Like you do not do that before Thanksgiving, and just so already it creates tension. It makes us happy, and that's pretty much our behavior in line with our values. But I think when it starts earlier, the pressure starts more and more. And again, I think there's combining features. I think one of the features to me is that when we know we're moving to the holidays as adults, what we know is, hey, if I can get a little extra time off, or, which means I'm trying to get all my ducks in a row before I leave work, which creates stress. And then you get home because you're probably working a few more extra hours or trying to get more things done. And then it feels like there's a little different pressure. It just is going to pull us into our limbic system, that emotional system, or maybe into the fight, flight, freeze system, which makes us a little more on edge or a little more nervy when people are putting more expectation on us. So, and then usually people that oversee us have their stressors. So then they're saying, hey, I need you to pick this thing up. And you're like, well, I'm already trying to pick up extra things because I'm trying to take some extra time off. And I've got to get all this stuff done. And then we've got this party we need to go to. And I don't even want to go to this party. And, but we've got to go. And I've got to go to my spouse's party. And I don't even want to do that. So the brain is just going to start to get more and more in that defense mode, or that fight, flight, freeze mode. And then all of a sudden the holidays become not fun for people. And whose families do we have to hit? And which friends do we have to go visit? And all of a sudden the joy starts to seep out of, a time of the year that's supposed to be, wonderful, for at least in construct. It's supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year. And it ends up being some of the most miserable time of the year. So that's just off the top of my head, kind of rambling about some thoughts that I have.
Well, yeah. And that's where I'm kind of curious, Casey, what you think about this be related to MI and healthy communication, because, we were just at the international conference for this with Mint a little recently. And it's like, is it motivational interviewing becoming just helpful communication? It's like, well, there's a differentiation here of what is MI and what is healthy communication. So you were starting about that and getting into kind of the thinking around the holidays. And so I'm just kind of wondering what you think might be some key distinct factors there, or things that, this is really where some of the pieces of MI you think would come in, such as empathy or some of these others, versus, maybe other pieces like strategically responding to change talk or other things that maybe you don't do as much for, you know, communication with your family. I don't know. What are your thoughts about the difference there, practically or concretely or more tangibly?
I, you and I discussed this quite a bit. I remember the ethics, breakout session that I went to, motivation and ethics, and I told you part of my itchiness around that was that people were talking about applications of MI and then acknowledging it might not score high in spirit of motivational interviewing, or what we call the intentions with the MICA. And I think, well, then it's not motivational interviewing. I think that's where we get looped in. It's like, well, I tried to use MI, and then you listen to the conversation, like, well, you did reflective listening and you did open ended questions, but that's not motivational interviewing. I always talk about that. That's flour, sugar, and butter, but that doesn't make it grandma's recipe. But everybody thinks if you're using flour, sugar, and butter, it's just a variation of grandma's recipe. But the difference between a chocolate lava cake and an oatmeal cookie is significantly different, even though they both use flour and sugar. They're not even close to the same thing. And I think people confuse communication skills with a communication style. Um, and what tends to happen when you use communication skills with friends or family and you're trying to use skills, people feel like you're trying to therapize them or counsel them, and can be very off putting, and almost offensive. That it's like, stop talking down to me. It just can create all sorts of dynamics, which is to me the antithesis of empathy, of people feeling deeply heard and understood. That's a mindset. I think even more said over the years, I realize it's more of a mindset than it is even a skill set for people to feel deeply heard and understood. So those are the things that I think of right out of the gate in terms of where people try to say, like you were talking about, I love is helpful conversation motivational interviewing? Well, no. It could be the difference between an oatmeal cookie and a chocolate chip cookie, you know. But they're still two different recipes, even though most of the things you're doing are similar. Motivationing is such a specific method of communication that is measurable, and you're either doing it or you're not doing it. You can be doing aspects of it, but are you doing all of it? That's a whole different mindset. So that's why I love what Danielle brought up, and what you're bringing up is, if we're talking motivational interviewing, I wouldn't say, here's how you use motivational during the holidays. That would feel like an unethical or misappropriated use of motivational interviewing. Here's how you can be empathetic to reduce tension and increase engagement and a sense of stability in your family. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great lane for us to travel down.
Mm-hmm.
I just love a couple things popped out for me in a big way there, because I had a very interesting conversation recently. And I'm not practiced in using motivational interviewing. However, the gifts of all the training and being around like osmosis with you guys, I was able to really, I think, do something quite cool with someone I love who was really, really struggling with the pressures, not only that you described at the start of this podcast, but also the pressures and ideas from childhood of
Yes.
what we took on as this should be something we do. And then you go through losses and family members and parental figures. And all of a sudden you're like, do I hold on to these things that were actually kind of instituted by them? And is that really mine? There's so much going on.
Yes.
And I was able to, have empathy and listen to somebody I care about deeply. Actually, it was just last night. And what I was so proud of myself for was recognizing, oh, your stress is coming from you want to change other people's behavior and you want their values to align with yours. And I'm
Wow.
like, oh God, if I can just, I was so proud of myself for just recognizing that through all the stuff. And then to try to help redirect her, like all you can do with your decision about what you want to do around, in this case, it was Christmas, um, is just really get in touch with your values and make sure that whatever decision you make, that behavior aligns with your values, and let go of the other thing that popped for me as you were talking was expectations. let
Yes.
go of expectations that of anybody else and how they might react to your behavior and your values. And so it was really something. It was like one of those things where I was like so grateful for you guys, because I'm not sure I would have ever been able to have that. I just jotted it down. It's not communication skill, it's a communication style.
That I think that's so important. It I think that's a practical application of when we talk about the communication solution versus motivational interviewing. I mean, I think that is part of the solution in communication is that high accurate empathy and high accurate empathy, and then going into the values. It's the first thing that clicked when you were talking about that, Danielle, is in my life around the holidays, it really has reinforced, is your behavior in line with your values? Because as stress increased in my life, I could feel myself getting more short tempered or more frustrated or more anxiety ridden as the holidays came in. And from training MI so long, I kept thinking, your behavior is not in line with your values. It just is not. And and the monumental task it can feel like sometimes to go, okay, what do it take to get your behavior in line with your values? And it's like, but I can't because I'm so stressed. It takes a deeper level of focus and intention to go, can I get my ship righted? Can I get myself back on track and get my behavior in line with it when everything in you, your whole brain is getting sucked into that emotional reaction or that more frustration or aggression or the, fight, flight, freeze. And when everything is pulling you there to kind of claw your way back up into your, prefrontal cortex and your executive functioning, that's just takes a concerted effort, especially when all your human triggers are getting flipped on, and all your buttons are getting pushed and everything wants to have this reaction. The thing for me that really catalyzed it was having children. Is I just thought I was raised, even though my family had its own stress and chaos, my mother was just so enamored and obsessed with ritual and the joy of ritual. And that rubbed off on me. Not everybody in my family, but it rubbed off on me. So I have this just profound joy around ritual, even though I was raised in kind of probably borderline poverty. And I had joy around the holidays, and I'd have disappointments and everything else. But to this day, I feel magic around the holidays because I choose to believe in the magic of the holidays. And I have, the twins, you're 14 now, and one is definitely not a believer. Kind of that was facade was cracked for her probably about 4 because she was always advanced for age, but probably admitted when she was probably 11 or 12, like, yeah, there's no such thing. And my other 14-year-old twin is a believer. This is the year that she's writing the "Tell Me the Truth" Santa letter at 14, and all of her friends make fun of her, but she leans more that direction of I believe, I just believe, And I just tell her, I still believe. Your grandma believes, like your dad believes. We just believe in Santa. We believe in the magic of the holidays. And you can feel the shift if you believe. You can feel the shift when either the weather changes a little bit or the leaves start to fall. You can feel a shift. I can feel that shift. Viscerally, I can feel the shift. And that to me is the start of the spirit and the shift in the world and the perception in the world. But that's how I perceive it. Some people feel that shift and start getting nauseous and depressed and anxiety ridden and angry as they feel that shift. And this goes back to what you had just talked about. Is your behavior in line with your values? What would it look like if your behavior is in line with your values? And when I had children, I was very clear. I want my behavior to be in line with my values. Because that's my vision. If I'm watching the movie screen of my life, that's one that I'm going to be sitting there after the lights come up and just staring at the screen going, I am so impressed with how that played out. That's who I want to be when I grow up. And that's how Casey talks to himself about, is your behavior in line with your values?
Is the gift
Go ahead,
in
Danielle.
is not the gift, but when you think about, all right, I'm going to shore up my values, my behavior with my values, and I'm having to interact with somebody who has a completely different experience. Like you said, you have joy, others could be triggered by depression. Um, is it then just honoring that difference and allowing the other person to not poop on your parade, but also don't poop on theirs and kind of
Yeah.
let however it plays out. Is that like the forgiveness, the kindness, the
The thing,
allowance?
I think that's the mindset behind it. For me, it didn't feel like that might be enough. And again, I don't need to fix or change their perspective, but it goes back to it just when I was talking about this, it just triggered me about the whole movie screen analogy. And when, as actively a clinical therapist, with a practice, that was one of the things that I would always have clients think about is when you look on that movie screen and whoever the actor is playing you, how would they play this situation out that when you walk away from that scene, you're like, oh my God, that's what I want to be when I grow up. Like, how can I be like that? So it's not just handling with grace. There's more of an intention or an activation of how do I know the situation was better than it would have been if I wasn't in the scene? How did they walk away? So I may not fix their perspective. I don't need to fix their perspective. That's not my job. But how did I do it in a way that I think has components of grace, like you talked about? How do you do it in a way that's just honoring? But there needs to be something else that there's something that I did that the person walks away. And I think what clicked in my brain is maybe they went from pre contemplation to contemplation, or that I shine something about them that has a beauty or a purity or a hope, or a desire for hope that I could reflect that back in a way that something activated in their brain that they're like, I wish I could, or I'd like to be. And just, I guess, from an MI perspective, that it just initiated a little bit of change talk, not because I'm trying to change their behavior, but just that it was granting them a life preserver when they feel like they're just drowning. And all of a sudden they get a full, full capacity air in their lungs again, for the first time in a while. And if I can do that, that's different than just, allowing them to be where they are, not triggering. So I think that for me, that I just want to make sure that if I watch that movie of myself in that scene, that what I did, I was awe inspired by. Not because I'm trying to be inspirational, but just because it was such a beautiful thing to do or provide for another human being, that their place in the world or their space in the world is just a bit better because we interacted versus if we hadn't. Um, so I think it's just a little bit, there's just a little bit something extra to that than just, offering grace or, not being judgmental. It just feels like there's just a little bit extra that tries to ignite a little bit of hope in them, if that makes sense.
Wow, it's beyond making sense to me. That's profound. And I always say I'm gonna hold it together when I get on these podcasts, but I always get a little teary eyed when there's an opportunity to help somebody be better or live a higher quality life. That's really awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, Casey, you're going ahead. It looks like you had a thought, but I can definitely share and chime in here if you want.
Well, the thing I just want to what I appreciate about these when we get in this level of conversation is the transparency about that. Like, I liked being able to have the real questions that you bring up because it lets me talk very transparently and less clinically about what we do. And I think we're talking the holiday. Now I'm going to get emotional. I mean, we're talking
Yeah.
about the spirit of seasons, and when we're talking about the spirit of the seasons, that is not a clinical tool. That's beyond the intention of motivational interviewing. That's just how do we engage each other uh, in a way that just let's put the chaos and the insanity of the world to the side for a minute and just can we just look at each other and just go, I know you want it to be okay. I want it to be okay. Let's just right now, let's just be us be okay. And if you and I can be okay, even if we don't agree right now, like, I mean, just be okay and just have a real conversation and not have to be on the defense. And that would be, I think that just contributes to a better holiday season. And John, what were you thinking?
Well, there's so many things here around, Danielle, what you brought up, and and Casey, what you're getting at with, things related to MI, like compassion for other people. And Danielle, what you're talking about of what do you grow up with? And MI, motivational interviewing, is not a psychoanalysis tool that gets into our childhood and gets into the beliefs that we've come up with and our cultural constructed a container that we grow up in that create certain types of ways of being in the world, beliefs, right? And I just want to highlight that that's a big container, that if we're talking about Western American culture versus, I don't know, Indian culture versus a different, but we're talking about a Western lens right now, and that it's important that that has some similarities, but other people might have different experiences in the holidays for whatever reason, but that your family growing up and how you've been modeled or not with things like empathy will really matter to how you treat that person, Danielle, of the person. You might have a lot of compassion and fall into the fixing reflex if you haven't been exposed to as much demonstration of understanding, like Casey, you're really bringing up here as a key thing. And if you haven't been modeled that, and or you don't have as much skill, I know I'm still working on that skill, that it takes a lot of practice and discipline to work on expressing what it must be like for others, when especially we're just used to saying, no, well, I think this, or, oh, I can relate to that because I've had this experience, and me. And we're just so used to doing it because that's how we operate. And so to have the modeling of that, and just the awareness that that's a thing, versus the experience when we get it from a good friend or a therapist of what empathy feels like, that's its own thing. And the compassion, Danielle, that you're talking about, you're seemingly like you're feeling, is its own thing. And they tend to get conflated, like, oh, if I'm compassionate, I'm an empathic being, right? And we know they're distinctly important and distinctly different. The one thing that I wanted to bring up around this is there's so much around values you both are getting at. Like, do I want to connect with those people in my family? Or are there certain people I want to just have healthy boundaries around, but still respect them and honor them? You can do that too. And just get clear, how much am I doing this out of my own sense of obligatory sense of connection so I don't feel judged by other people? And how much am I doing this with a sense of integrity that tries to balance that with my own sense of being in the world, and in a way that tries to not have me feel selfish, and that helps me feel like I'm making an impact on my friend that might be depressed or my family member that's really struggling? How much do you balance out these values of a sense of integrity, your sense of your own self-health, your sense of connection with other people? It can get really complex, but if you boil it back to what you both are getting at, it's like, how do I want to be with people and what really matters to me? And I think it also could go deeper and deeper for people if they wanted to seek therapy around it. But Danielle, what you brought up that's so powerful is, okay, what do I have control over in this moment? It's trying to listen deeply and listen for their perspective. Like you're talking about, Casey, listen for what motivates them and what's important to them. And if I care enough about connecting with them or contributing to them, which is a big if around the holidays, certain people, and depending on your own triggers and all that stuff, then if you do, the spirit of MI, treating them with compassion, being curious about their thoughts and ideas, supporting their choice, things like this, treating them as an equal person, that's a thing that can be used in multiple conversations, even if you don't use all the other components of MI. So I think there's pieces of the recipe you're talking about, Casey, that can be really helpful for how we see and treat others. But I also think there's an internal sense of, do I have healthy boundaries, or am I doing this obligatorily and building resentment and contempt for a lot of the situation? And I think that's its own kind of navigation of your personal values and what you really want, how you want to communicate with others. So that was just some thoughts going through.
The thing that brings up for me is when you look through kind of a Western holiday model, or you leave the Western model and you look, more globally, it seem I think where it seems like it's hard to reconcile is that every culture has celebration, and celebration is, when you think of the concept of celebration, it just kind of lightens you up and you think we get to celebrate no matter what the culture is, no matter what the struggle is, no matter what are the, socioeconomic, political issues are going on. Celebration is celebration. What makes sense to me when I look through any of those different lenses or look through my own lens when you'd have no reason to celebrate, if you're in a war-torn country or your parents are abusing you or drinking and fighting with each other, there's not a lot to celebrate. So while everybody is celebrating, it makes the distance between your experience and their experience so vast. That chasm is so wide and so deep. It can just develop such a resentment or an anger. So not only are you experiencing the trauma, you're having these imprints about what celebration is that has kind of this antithetical effect, that it's just like this is the exact opposite of what celebration is supposed to be. But when you're feeling the exact opposite of other people celebrating whatever that celebration is, if there's bullets flying over your head or you've been separated from your children, there's really not a lot to celebrate. Um, and I think this is it's giving me goosebumps just thinking about it. But I think this is where, in spite of that, how do people find hope now? And that, which is a whole different podcast, because when the things that you and I listened to, what Miller was talking about hope and the research behind it is in spite of adversity, in spite of trauma, when people access hope, it actually improves outcomes. But then how do you expect people to access hope in the middle of trauma, um, you know, and stress? But this phenomenally dynamic thing, in our skull puts us in a place where we have the capacity to do such amazing things. And just having the cognition to go, do I want to go down this path emotionally, or do I want to try to raise myself up into my values, to have the resiliency from childhood and protective factor that you can even do that. So even though we're raised in the same neighborhood, it doesn't mean our brain developed exact the same or raised in the same family, depending on what our protective factors and our resiliency is and that plasticity. And then since it is the holidays or the season, what I think of is it, and then what's in your spirit, different people in the same family are born with a different spirit. And so is there just something that there's a gravitational pull that I will succeed. I want to believe. I want to see the best in people. I want to rise above. I want to be the best I can be in spite of my circumstances. Those are things we can talk about with protective factors that we know of, that we can measure. But then I think there's a whole, spirit side of it, of, what makes them tick beyond their body? Why are they here beyond their body? I mean, now we're really getting into the holiday season and the spirit of the season. But I think all of those things contribute to how do I want to show up? Where do I want to put my attention? And what do I have control over? And this is why, for me, when I can go all the way from the spirit side to the N of one side, what I have, some choice over is how do I open my mouth and what am I going to say? There's all the things I want to say, but what am I going to choose to say in this moment? Because which one is going to get me the outcome that I most want? And that's where it brings down to effective communication.
Mm-hmm. And clarity and mindset. Danielle, you were about to jump in. I just wanted to throw in, like, what am I experiencing and what do I want to experience? And I think
Right.
there's a self-reflective component that you and Danielle are getting out here around how much is it my role and how much do I really want to help that friend or family member that's really struggling? And how much am I aware that this is how I want to be in that movie of my life? How much have I
Yes.
self-reflected on these things? What are my values? And what does it mean to feel connected with certain people in my family, but still operate from a place of integrity? What does that even look like? What does that sound like? I'm not very practiced in empathy, for example. So how would I even express that beyond I understand? And how would I even start that process with you sound like you're frustrated, right? Like just these different, there is skill sets and there is awarenesses, I guess, what I'm putting on the table here to self-reflect on and get clear about. And that's where talking with a good friend or a therapist seems like there's possibility there to help inform your MI to be the most potent with your MI and skill set and awareness as possible. But at the same time, you don't have to have that. You could have just a sense of what am I picking up from MI on how I treat people and how I see them, like you're talking about, Casey, that I think is really important, that you don't have to have all that. It's the lens in which I see other people and how I want to treat them. And also, how do I want to treat myself and look at myself with compassion as well. And I think all of that can create this sort of sense that you're talking about, Casey. Sorry, Danielle, you were going to jump in with something there.
No, I think this is great. And as we move to like final thoughts, I know what mine is and my takeaway, and I want to thank you guys for it, because the movie analogy is really helpful. And also the acknowledgement that there are many people who don't have, quote unquote, something to celebrate. I've experienced, deep loss in my life, and have been around other people who have experienced and are going through deep grieving and loss and pain and so many different things. And you said it again. It's that word out, I think, will always work into a podcast, which is hope. And it's like, what if there's always reason to celebrate hope? And when I think of my movie, I'm like, oh, whoever I'm interacting with, what's aligned with my values? And it's like, oh, if I can help that person walk away with a little bit more hope than maybe they had before they encountered me, that's a good life.
That is
So
good.
this really helped me. So thank you. And I want to pass it to you guys for final thoughts, but super, super helpful. Thank you.
But my final thought is just, I think if there's a gift for yourself, for anyone, it's just the gift of grace for yourself, that whether you love the holidays or don't love the holidays, it's not always easy. Just giving yourself grace that, you're trying to do your best and you want to do the best. And I think when you're stuck and don't know what to do, when we talk about, just ambivalence, I think it is just kind of looking at that movie screen and just going, what would be a profound interaction on that screen that would make you feel better? So when you're stuck and don't know what to do, I think sometimes that just helps to take a step outside of yourself and look at that movie screen and go, how would I deal with this in a way that I would just be profoundly in awe of how that person navigated the situation? And sometimes that can move us to a better place when our brain just feels so stressed and overwhelmed. So, but that's my thought, is just grace for ourselves, that, life is not easy. And when it may be a time for celebration, that's not always easy for all people either. So.
Mhm. I'll just lastly add this sense of grace for ourselves and compassion to build resilience, that some people, um, you know, grow up with extremist situations that I've only heard of and experienced with participants in trainings, that is just horrendous, with adverse childhood experiences. And that resiliency can be very difficult to build. So what is it that, as you think about yourself listening to this, what is it that builds resiliency? We know sleep is really important for not being triggered. And so what are the things that build your own self-compassion? Where do things go too far if you're talking with someone, either someone that's triggering you in your family? How do you be that person in the movie, but how do you set yourself up so that you're not feeling so triggered you can't be that person? How do you set yourself up to have that resiliency in that moment of good restedness, centeredness, groundedness?
Yeah.
What do you need, and how do you not stretch yourself so thin that you start to have those triggers or build resentment and or come in with contempt? And I think creating that self-health, compassion, taking care of ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally. Casey, you were talking about spiritually. How do you do that in a way to be your best self? And MI is one way to have a lens to treat other people when you can operate from that place.
I love that. I love how you brought it back to self-care and compassion. So that's awesome. Thank you. I hope everybody listening, you got as much out of this as I did. Keep just really tuning into you and your values, and really appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining, and we'll catch you on the next podcast. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy
Awesome.
holidays.
Thank you for listening to the Communication Solution Podcast with Casey Jackson and John Gilbert. As always, this podcast is about empowering you on your journey to change the world. So if you have questions, suggestions, or ideas, send them our way at casey@ifioc.com. That's CASEY@ifioc.com. For more information or to schedule a training, visit ifioc.com. Until our next Communication Solution Podcast, keep changing the world.